So if you have questions, you can ask. Okay, my name is Ahmed. Inshallah, I'll show you the models. The models we have here are about the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we're going to cover some of the stories. If you have questions, you can ask. Okay. So this is Mecca. That's what it was at the time of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, around 4,000 years ago. You know, Mecca was an isolated valley, and it was mountains. So no trees, no water. No one was living in Mecca at that time. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was told to take his wife Hajar and his son Ismail to Mecca. So he erected that tent for his family, and then he went back to Palestine. You know, he left his family in the desert, knowing that Allah would take care of him. A few days later, Hajar anha ran out of water, and that's why she ran between Safa and Marwa. You know, she was looking for a caravan or water. After she had taken several routes between these two mountains, Jibreel alayhi salam came down and struck his wing onto the ground. And you see the water started gushing out from there. And she was trying to stop the water. She was saying Zamzam. That's why we call it Zamzam well today. The Yemeni people used to go to Syria on business, and on the way back to Yemen, they would stop to take rest behind this mountain outside of Mecca. One day they saw birds flying over the valley. They knew there was water in there, so they went to the valley and they found Hajar, Ismail, and the well of Zamzam. They wanted to stay permanently in Mecca. Hajar accepted it, but she had one condition. She just wanted to be responsible for the water. After the death of Hajar alayhi salam, Prophet Ibrahim came back to Mecca, and Allah told him to rebuild the Kaaba. See, he rebuilt it together with his son Ismail, and then he climbed up this mountain, you see Abu Qubais, and from there he started calling people to the religion of Allah. Over 1,800 years later, another tribe called Khuzaa came and conquered Mecca. Their leader, Amr bin Luhay, was the one who brought the idols to Mecca. So because of him, the people of Mecca became idol worshippers. You know, that's when paganism started in Mecca, around 1,800 years after the death of Nabi Ibrahim. 200 years prior to the birth of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, that's when the people of Quraysh took over. You know, Qusay bin Kilab, the Prophet's great-grandfather, he gathered the people of Quraysh from the surrounding valleys. They conquered Mecca, and Qusay became the ruler. You know, that's when the people of Quraysh overthrew the people of Khuzaa, just 200 years before the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he had Mecca. So that wall around the Kaaba was the Haram, you know, the forbidden area. The people were not allowed to do certain things within that wall. The white building is Dar al-Nadwa, where the leaders of Quraysh start their meetings. Abdullah's house, where Prophet Muhammad was born and raised, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's house, and that one is Dar al-Arqam. Al-Arqam is a companion. His house was like a hideout or a secret school. And in the beginning of the message, the Prophet and his companions used to meet there and study Islam secret. Inshallah, we'll talk more about it. Then behind here we have the Kaaba. So when Nabi Ibrahim came to Mecca, the Kaaba was not there. You know, it had been destroyed by the floods. So Nabi Ibrahim came back to Mecca. He dug up the foundation and then he raised the walls of the Kaaba. So that's how big he made it, 15 by 10 meters. He made it roofless and he made 2 doors for it. 2,500 years later, the Prophet's family Quraysh wanted to rebuild the Kaaba, but they didn't have enough halal money. And that's why they made it smaller. You see, 10 by 10. The actual size is 15 by 10, not 10 by 10. So they added the semicircle to the Kaaba to make it 15 by 10. Now when you do tawaf, you must do it from the outside. You can't do it from the inside. When you're in that area, it's as though you're inside the Kaaba. Abdullah bin Zubayr returned the Kaaba to the original size, 15 by 10. He was told that the Nabi had wanted the Kaaba to be 15 by 10, and that's why he returned it to the original size. 10 years later, Hajjaj bin Yusuf made it smaller again and went back to 7 size. And that's how it is today. Since the time of Hajjaj, no one has changed the Kaaba. It's been the same for the past 30 years. The Ottomans made it taller, 15 meters high, and the very last one is for King Fahd. You know, back in the 90s, King Fahd renovated the Kaaba. You see the water, the rain, the lamps, the kiswa, but the structures are pretty much the same. You know what kiswa is? Kiswa is the cloth or the cover of the Kaaba. This one is 230 years old, you know, from the Ottoman Empire. Kiswa, 25 years old when he got married. You know, when Amina, the Prophet's mother, was pregnant, Abdullah went to Asham on business in Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon today. All the way back to Mecca, Abdullah stopped over in Medina. He was very sick when he was in Medina, and that's why he couldn't make it to Mecca. So Abdullah, the Prophet's father, died here in Medina. And most of the historians say that Abdullah had died before the Prophet was born, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. See Abraha, the man with the elephant, he built a church in Yemen. He wanted the Arabs to worship Allah there, but the Arabs didn't follow his orders. And that's why he came to destroy the Kaaba. See, he had a huge army and one elephant. Historians say that the elephant's name was Mahmud. Many people tried to stop Abraha's army all the way to Mecca, but they couldn't because the army was extremely strong. And that's how the Muttalib told the people of Quraysh to go to the tops of the mountains, because they were not strong enough to fight back. Yeah, when Abraha's army arrived in Mecca, a dark cloud of small birds appeared from nowhere. You know, we call them ababi. Each bird that flew down, they threw them on the army. In just minutes, the whole army was destroyed. And that's why we call that the year of the elephant. Yeah. Around 50 days later, Prophet Muhammad was born. He was born on Monday, 12th of Rabiul in the elephant year. He was born pure, clean, and already circumcised. His mother said, from the day he became pregnant to them till the day I delivered him, I never felt any pain. And then she said the pregnancy was very easy. Prophet was born in his father's house, Abdullah. His grandfather Abdul Muttalib took him to the Kaaba. He thanked Allah for the baby and he named him Muhammad. The people of Quraysh used to send their new babies to the desert. They believed that the desert was good for their personality, their language. They knew it would toughen them up. And that's when Nabi spent some time in the village of Bani Sa'ida, where Sayyidah Halima took care of the Prophet and became his wet nurse. It's reported that Nabi stayed there for 4 years and then Halima brought him back. Okay? And then the Prophet lived with his mom in his father's house, Abdullah. When he was 6 years old, his mother Amina took him to Medina to see his maternal uncle. They stayed there for 1 month, and as they were returning to Mecca, his mother died in Al-Abwa. And Abwa is in between Mecca and Medina, around 180 kilometers from here. So by the time he was 6, he had lost both of his parents. His mother, a servant to Maimon, took him back to Mecca and gave him to his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. Subhanallah, the grandfather died 2 years later. So Abu Talib became his guardian. Abu Talib was a businessman at the time. You know, he wanted to take him to Asham to teach him business. On the way to Asham, a priest by the name Bahira saw the seal of the Prophet showed on the back of Nabi. When Nabi had a mark on his back, we call that Khatam al-Nubuwah. The priest recognized that mark, he knew that was the Prophet. He asked Abu Talib, who is this? Abu Talib said, my son. The priest said, no, he's not your son. His father should not be alive. Abu Talib said, that's correct. He's my nephew and his father had died before he was born. And then the priest said, your nephew is going to be an important man, so you should take him back to